Welcome to our civic forum. This is our second topic. My name is Wen. I'm from Bridge Road International Foundation, who is the co-host organization for this forum. And let me introduce Betty Yuan, who is our co-founder of Bridge Road International Foundation.
Good afternoon, our honorable speakers and the moderator. Welcome to join this afternoon civic forum. Thank you.
And Henry Ying, who is the president of the Apapa Bay Area region. And Apapa is also our co-host organization. Henry will start our today's program. Henry.
Thank you, Wen. Good afternoon, everyone. Particularly an honorable moderator and honorable speakers and all guests. It's definitely my honor to co-hold this event this afternoon. APAPA stands for Asian Pacific Islander Public Affairs. I'm the president of the Bay Area region. I'd like to share with every one of you a very short history of this forum. It was back to the later last year, right after the presidential election. Then we all were experienced a very divided community. Particularly in the API community, we found very serious divisiveness. And we realized that the only way we will be able to make some minor changes possible by ourselves is to have a direct communications among ourselves. So late January, on January the 28th, we had the first Zoom meeting discussing about how can we possibly put our act together in the API community, starting from the Bay Area. We decided to launch this civic forum, hoping that we will be able to invite the honorable speaker, like all 4 or 5 of you today, to share the history, the spirit, the record, and all those successful records and experience from API in American history. We launched the first one on March the 6th, and the result happened to be very positive. And therefore we choose to continue this on a quarterly basis. That's why today we're very fortunate to have our star moderator, David, from channels ABC 7, and 4 outstanding speakers who will share with us on the theme of Asian American history, leadership, and political participations. APAPA is nonpartisan. We try to maintain mutual positions on any topic or conversations to benefit the fellow citizens. So this is what we like to accomplish. And again, once more, we'd like to appreciate Dr. Chen Liao, who put this together with a tireless efforts in almost 3 months. And now I'd like to introduce you the program chair, Mike Liu.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you very much for the audience currently logging and the future audience who may search the record information for today's forum. And obviously, thank you very much for the honorable moderator and all the honorable guests here, guest speakers here today to join this very special forum. As we all know, this is the weekend, this is a Memorial Day weekend, and it's a long weekend. A lot of people well deserve to have a great celebration. And it is also the last weekend to celebrate the Asian American and the Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So it's all come together, and I greatly appreciate everybody to designate your time and community for. So today, it is certainly, it is our Civic Forum's honor to invite Ms. David Louie to host our second forum. I'm very humbled to have the opportunity to briefly introduce Ms. David Louie to audience. Actually, I don't think Ms. Louie needs any more introductions, particularly for the Bay Area audience. As you all know, David was born in Ohio. However, he moved to the Bay Area about 50 years ago. 50 is about a half century, but although we can't tell that, David. But as you've been here long, and then you have an office, you're local, and you have an office in San Jose. It's an honor to introduce you. You've been with ABC since you joined the group 50 years ago or so. Ms. Louie is the AMA winner, winning as the business technology and general reporter for at ABC. David is also had won multiple Lifetime Achievement Award. I mean, we all live one life, but you have earned multiple Lifetime Achievements. So greatly, congratulations for that. David had been interviewed, one-on-one interview from a lot of the CEOs and the well-known people in the society and the community and all different kind of industry. For example, the Yahoo co-founder and CEO, Jerry Yang, and also somebody named Tim Cook, who's the current CEO of Apple, obviously. So without further ado, let me present Ms. David Louie as our moderator today, who would introduce all the other honorable guests. So thank you so much again for everybody, and thank you, David, all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I'm really glad to be here. And let's say a warm welcome to everyone who's watching the Civic Forum today. I know that many of you happen to be residents of Silicon Valley and the San Jose area. And as Mike mentioned, that's where I work, covering business, technology, and other news. So I hope to get to meet you in person one of these days. You know, we're so fortunate to have 4 very prominent panelists today with very diverse backgrounds. They will share their perspectives on what it means to be an Asian American today. Now, each one is highly respected in their respective fields, and we will learn so much from their insights today. Our nation is made stronger by the immigrants who come here, but we are far from a perfect country. We just saw this terrible tragedy of gun violence in San Jose last Wednesday. We have seen hate crimes against Asian Americans. We see a call for an Asian Lives Matter movement, just as there was a Black Lives Matter movement. Those are just some of the topics we'll want to discuss. So let's get started. Our first speaker is the Honorable Troy Nunley, U.S. District Court Judge. He was nominated by President Obama in 2013 and confirmed by the Senate. And he was born in San Francisco. He knows the criminal justice system well, having been a prosecutor and a Superior Court judge. You can see his credentials on the screen right now. So thanks very much, Judge Nunley, for bringing an important perspective to the forum. We're going to have you do some opening remarks.
All right. Thank you, David. I'm humbled and I'm honored to be here in the first instance because David is hosting. And as the initial speaker said, I think all of us have such a history of listening to David. He's been a fine spokesman and a fine spokesman on behalf of the Asian community as well. So I'm really honored and I'm humbled, and I'm also really hot in this robe. But everyone, they requested that I wear my robe, and I noticed everyone else is dressed very informally. So I think this was a setup for me. But, you know, I want to say the first thing I did when I came to the federal bench is I always thought that federal judges did the naturalization ceremonies. That was my first thought. And one of the first duties that I had as a federal judge is I performed a naturalization ceremony. And, you know, the reason I did it is because that is something that is very important to me. I grew up in San Francisco, and I grew up in a community, although at the time when I got older, it was a predominantly Black community. Our community was a community that was initially, it's over in the Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco. It was initially a Chinese community. It was, and in fact, I was telling my fellow panelists the other day how when I was a kid, we had a market, Big Save Market, which was on our main street on 3rd Street. And the family that owned it, the son, Eugene, was one of my best friends. And, you know, that community was Italian at one point. But the one thing that I did notice is I noticed, at least in my mind, how the diversity in our community really added to our community. And so when I also teach law school, and I also go around Sacramento, and a lot of teachers here know me because I'm always speaking at the public schools. And one of the things I try to teach students, I try to teach them the richness of our culture, of our American culture. And, you know, I think it's remarkable that, you know, I didn't do much to become a citizen. I was simply born here. But, you know, many of you, recent citizens who recently gained citizenship, you've done a little bit more than I have. In some instances, you came here to realize the promises of America. You came here for jobs. You may have come here for family. But there's some compelling reason it brought you to this country. But I think the common denominator would be with all of you. You've all made tremendous sacrifices. And I'll tell you, I love America, but it's sort of, I kind of got defaulted into being a citizen. And so I want to thank you. I really want to thank you for becoming citizens in this fine country. And so I want to thank you for becoming part of this great nation here in America. And I do think that it is true. I mentioned hope and dreams, and I do think America does provide you with the potential to achieve your dreams and aspirations. And I also think it is important that you also are contributing to America. I think anytime we share our values, our cultural values, our ideas, I think we all benefit as a result. And so I'm emboldened, I'm humbled to be here, and I appreciate it. Now, I want to get into some sort of nuts and bolts thing, because I know that there were a number of questions that people had on certain subjects. And I want to kind of jump right into it here. And unfortunately, you're going to see me, you know, wipe my brow several times, because right now I'm in the courthouse and the air conditioning is not on. So you'll see me do this occasionally. So in any event, one of the questions people were asking is how many amendments to the United States Constitution. There are 27 amendments to the United States Constitution that protects the rights of all Americans. And the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution are what we call the Bill of Rights. And those are the amendments to the United States Constitution that basically covers the rights that we all have as United States citizens. And the other day it was interesting because a student, I was having a discourse with a student of mine. I teach law school. So a student was asking me, when was the last amendment to the United States Constitution? And the last amendment to the United States Constitution was in 1992. It's very difficult to amend the United States Constitution, but it can be done, okay? And there's really 4 ways to amend the Constitution. I could explain them, but they're somewhat convoluted. So if you do have a question later about this, I can explain it to you. But there are 4 ways that you can change the United States Constitution. Someone was also asking, what are the main points to the United States Constitution? I think that may vary depending on who you talk to. For me, I do have points that I think are main points to the United States Constitution. And I think those, for me, those fall into 3 main functions. The first is the United States Constitution creates a national government consisting of a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch. And I'm a member of the third branch of government, the judicial branch. And those branches of government operate as a system of checks and balances against one another. You always hear, or you may hear it said that the federal government, legislative, executive, and the judicial acts as a system of checks and balances within themselves. I think the second main point for me to the United States Constitution is it divides power between the federal government and the state government. I always hear, sometimes I hear, especially when I talk in high school, they say, well, why doesn't the federal government do this? Why doesn't the federal government do that? The federal government is a government of limited jurisdiction. The only time the federal government can step in and act is if it's a power that is specifically enumerated in the United States Constitution. Otherwise, if it doesn't designate a power to the government, then that power is left to the states. And that's why, for example, you see states right now fashioning election laws and not the federal government. And that's a big, it's a big topic amongst my students. So they always want to know, why can't the federal government just step in and create a national election? But any right not enumerated in the Constitution that falls to the federal government goes to the states. And the third, and I think this is important, this is very important, especially in this day and time, is the United States Constitution protects the various individual liberties of American citizens, the freedom to not have your car searched, the freedom to not have your house, law enforcement come into your house illegally. And it creates this barrier between government and citizens so the government doesn't overreach. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that we do have these rights. These rights are very important, and that we do need to take stock of these rights. Another issue is, and I do think it's important to keep in mind, the history of the Constitution. I do think it's important that we realize that the Constitution, the framework of this Constitution, the document itself, it owes a lot to the history that led to its drafting. And we have to keep in mind the history when this document was drafted. The limitations placed on the federal government in each of the branches of government, remember, that was a reaction to the tyranny of British rule. And especially because British was what? It had a single monarchy. And the monarch made all the decisions in British society. And so, and then if you look at the breadth, and I mean the overall breadth of the powers that the national government has, that was a correction to the Articles of Confederation, because there were some who said that the Articles of Confederation, you remember, that was the short-lived system that we had before our Constitution. And so there were some who said that the Articles of Confederation were not enough. Okay, they were incapable of forging the 13 colonies into one nation. Okay, and so look at the times in which they were created, and so I think that's important to sort of give you a historical perspective. Now, another question was, how does the Electoral College system work? And there's some, especially students, and it's amazing the questions I get from students when I go around, and they are very informed. It's amazing that I think this climate that we're in right now has really, I always think that kids spend too much time on the computer playing video games or looking at YouTube videos, but I'm starting to realize that they have a lot more information than we have. They don't maybe have the practical experience, but they certainly have a lot more information, and they're a lot smarter than I gave them credit for, and I really mean that. And they always want to know about the Electoral College system. And I'll tell you, the simple answer is that in the system, in the Electoral College system that we have, each state gets a certain number of electors based on the total number of representatives in Congress. Okay, that's really what the Electoral College system is about. each elector does cast one electoral vote following the general election, and there are a total of 538 electoral votes. And as we know, because we've been seeing it all over TV and on the news during the recent election, you need 270 to win, and that gets you more than half. So once you get to 270, you can win. And so if no candidate gets, and this is another question that comes up, if no candidate gets 270 electoral votes, then the presidential election then leaves the electoral college system, and it heads where? It goes to Congress. Okay, and once it goes to Congress, then there's several things that someone just told me. Thank you for dressing in my robe. You're welcome. It's still hot. Okay, but once it goes to the House of Representatives, the House of Representatives elects the president from 3 presidential candidates who receive the most electoral votes, and each state delegation has 1 vote, and it's up to the individual states to determine how to vote. And so since the District of Columbia, for example, is not a state, the District of Columbia has no delegation in the House, and therefore the District of Columbia cannot vote. My students really get in an uproar about that. They always think that DC should be allowed to vote. And then they tell me the next thing is we should have a constitutional amendment. So a candidate must receive at least 26 votes, which is a majority of the states, to be elected. And then the Senate will go ahead and elect the vice president from the 2 vice presidential candidates with the most electoral votes. It is the most confounding thing for some people to understand, strictly because what we see a lot is the popular vote, and we think, well, if the majority of the people have voted, then have voted for a particular candidate, then that person should be elected. But that's simply not true, because the electoral college system, you can have, and we've seen that recently, where you have a candidate winning a popular vote, yet losing the electoral vote. And just to shift focus, people were also asking about the grand jury system. Here in the federal courts, we use the grand jury system to return indictments almost exclusively. There are some instances where the U.S. Attorney's Office will, if a criminal defendant agrees, they will elect to proceed by way of an information. Okay. Now, a grand jury, after a prosecutor studies the information that they receive from various sources, the police department, investigators, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it may be Treasury officials, Treasury officers, and information that they also get from talking with other people involved in a crime, perhaps, then the prosecution decides whether or not to present the case to the grand jury. Most states don't use the grand jury, but they can use the grand jury, but it's different than the federal grand jury. And so when a person is indicted, all an indictment really is formal notice. It's notice of what the charges are. So they give them an idea of what the charges are and what they're being charged with if the government believes they've committed a crime. The indictment contains information that informs the person of the charges against them, and it also includes, here in our district, it includes what the maximum penalty a person might possibly face if they go to trial, for example, and they are convicted. And so for let's say, for example, for a potential felony trial, a prosecutor will present the evidence to an impartial group of citizens. These are citizens from our community, okay? And that's called a grand jury. Witnesses may be called to testify, yes. Evidence is shown to the grand jury, yes. And an outline of the case, of the entire case, is presented to grand jury members. And so the grand jury listens to the prosecutor, grand jury listens to witnesses, and then they vote in secret on whether or not they believe enough evidence exists to charge that person with a crime. A grand jury may actually decide not to charge a person with a crime based on the evidence, and so they can issue a no indictment. All proceedings and statement made to the grand jury, and we do this, is done as a matter of course, they're all sealed. And what that means is that only the people in the room have knowledge about what was said and who said something, okay? And so the grand jury is a requirement. It's a constitutional requirement. It's in the United States Constitution for certain types of crimes, meaning it's written into the United States Constitution. So, you know, the theory is that you have a group of citizens who don't presumably know the person who is accused of a crime, the defendant, and they can make an unbiased decision about the evidence before voting to charge an individual with a crime. Grand juries are made up of between 16 to 23 members. In the grand jury proceedings, no, you cannot attend a grand jury proceeding. I can't attend a grand jury proceeding. Now, I've talked a little bit too long, and remember, I was an attorney, so I can keep talking forever and ever, but I'm going to stop right now, and I know we have some other questions further on, but that's just sort of some of the questions I know you want answered. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Judge Nunley. No question about it. Your students are very fortunate to have you as their professor, because your passion for the judicial system is very, very clear and very strong. So thank you so much. And we will look forward to hearing some more from you later on as we tackle some very important topics. Our next panelist is Raymond Chong. Now, he is unique in that he is a 6th generation Chinese American, and he is also an important historian, filmmaker, journalist, and writer who has documented the Asian American movement. He was born and raised in Los Angeles. So Raymond, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, David. I'd like to share my screen. This is the American Dream, the Yang Clan Odyssey on Gold Mountain. And this is my family saga. It is a story of our struggles, our sacrifices, our sorrows. But this is the American dream. We all are Americans in our minds, in our souls, in our hearts. We are dreamers. And in this quote, the American dream is the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars or high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man, each woman should be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for which they are, regardless of their fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. This is our American dream. In the early days, Gamsum, Gold Mountain, for the Chinese in the 19th century, that was our promised land for riches, for gold eagles. From the village Dragon Hill, Yonglengong, from Hoi Ping in Sayup, my great-great-grandfather, Shen Zheng, was the trailblazer from the Kangdong, from the land of rice and fish, from Imperial Cathay, and started our saga since 1849, 7 generations across the Pacific Ocean. 5 ways our pioneers, sojourners, adventurers, my forefathers came from this village of Dragon Hill, by the clippers, steamers across the Pacific Sea. They came to pursue their American dream in the Virgin America West, the first city, San Francisco, second city, Sacramento. From the bustling ports, the fertile valleys, teeming rivers, the crystal lakes, the rugged mountains, with their suffering, struggles, and sorrows, with their bloods, sweat, and tears, to achieve their American dream. And I go to my 5 generations before me. Chen Zheng, our gold miner, my great-great-great-grandfather. He came during the gold rush, when people from the world came across with the news of gold flakes, from the Sacramento Valley to the Sacramento River, from the foothills of the Sierra Nevada panning for gold. That was my great-great-grandfather, the trailblazer who came to Gumsum, Go Mountain. He was the first generation. Generation 2, Vincent Chen, the railroad laborer. My great-great-grandfather. He came in 1865 to join the Army of Canton, the 12,000 soldiers that came with the Central Pacific Railroad to build the Iron Road with the Iron Horse, to go to Blummer Cut, the cement rock, to build Cape Horn, 3 miles of a curved railbed, 1,300 feet above the American River, to build Dutch Flat, the wagon road, to go to the Donner Pass, 7,000 feet high, building 15 tunnels. Progress was measured 1 foot per day. The number 6 summit tunnel, the longest, 1,700 feet across, to build the breakthrough. Across the Great Basin to Nevada, Utah, to Pomeroy Point, Utah, on the day of the Golden Spike, May 10th, 1869. Vincent Chen, my great-great-grandfather, was there. Generation 3, Honglong Cheng, our merchant in Boston, Chinatown, came in 1892. And he was more of a successful entrepreneur in gambling and opium. And Judge, did not mention that, you didn't hear that part, okay? But he was quite successful in Boston, Chinatown for 34 years in the midst of the Tong Wars, the Onlong Tong, the Hipson Tong, the East and West gang. But he was also successful in investing in businesses, in restaurants, in stores. He went back to the homeland, to the village of Dragon Hill. Generation 4, Moi Chung, our chop suey operator. He came in 1912 on Angel Island Immigration Station and worked and owned a dry goods store in San Francisco, Chinatown, on Grand Avenue. Later, in Boston, Chinatown, the Royal Restaurant, chop suey. Chop suey is the best, delicious cuisine, better than Panda Express. No doubt about that. But he was more successful in Boston and beyond Boston, Chinatown, in Cambridge at Central Square, at the Imperial Restaurant, another chop suey house between MIT and Harvard University. It was catered not just for the Chinese, but for the white Americans at that time. So he had that business from 1923 to 1936. Generation 5, Jim Sui Chong, my father, our quiet man. He lived in Central Square, came and arrived in 1932 in Cambridge. Later in 1936, went to Little Tokyo, the bustling community of the Nisei across the Southland near Los Angeles City Hall. He became a mechanic at Curtis Wright Technical Institute in Glendale. And in this picture, he became a crew, an all-Chinese crew with the Navy, with Pan American Airways, with the China Clipper, the seaplanes, during World War II. He was a member of the Greatest Generation. Later, he became a partner of a Chinese nightclub called the Kubukan Theater Restaurant for 4 years at the gateway of Chinatown at 414 Grant Avenue, Chinese nightclub, where you had hard drinks, chop suey, dancing performance. That was, in my mind, his heyday of his life, the glory years, the golden age, Chinese nightclub. Later, he went to Los Angeles Chinatown, and that was a booming time during the 50s. But then he got into Lockheed Aircraft Company to inspect the bombers, the fighters for the military. He worked for Lockheed Aircraft Company, but he was also, during the weekend, a server for the Far East Cafe for China Mishi, a Japanese version of chop suey, at the Far East Cafe, known for its iconic chop suey restaurant. And He did fulfill his American dream. For me, to graduate from the University of Southern California. For my brother to graduate from California Institute of Technology. He fulfilled his American dream. Oh yes, perpetual foreigners, we hear that. Hear this that. We're always perceived being alien, no matter how long we've been here. Even for my family, being here 7 generations, we are professional foreigners, even now, after 172 years. On the flip side, we consider the modern minority, American dream, whiz kids, musical geniuses, straight A students, Ivy League education, strong family structure, industrial law abiding. This is the dangerous stereotypes that we have right now. And now, looking at this, we ask ourselves, is America the greatest country of the world? We have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Those were the sacred promises that are given to us as Americans. For we are immigrants and strangers from different shores. But we have the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But in 1790, Congress passed the first public law that only allowed citizenship for white Americans. So we always face being this xenophobia, as Chinese in particular, the slurs, heathen, chink, Chinaman. We got laws, Congress, the Pei-Te said all Chinese women were prostitutes. You could not immigrate. The Chinese Exclusion Act, we could not become naturalized citizens. You could only come to America if you're a merchant. Got created the certificate of identity, the paper sons, the paper daughters. Angel Island immigration station. Chinatowns were our ghetto. We were segregated, like the barrios. The laws in California, we cannot testify in court. We could not marry outside our race. We could not own property. This was the stigma that we were attached, being Chinese, the 100,000 to 200,000 Chinese at that time, subject to harassment, expulsions, massacres. Los Angeles, 1871. Rock Springs, 1885. Hell's Canyon, 1887. And in my case, my family, my grandfather, my grandmother, from 1923 to 1966, they were separated for 43 years. Their long lost love. My grandmother, she had my father at that time. 43 years later, fast forward, a crippled old lady meeting my grandfather at LAX on February 14th, 1966. And for my father, he was a paper son, came to Boston in 1932. So we, the Chinese, have been stigmatized, been harassed, been discriminated. But we always face the anti-Chinese sentiment. The Chinese must go. So much hatred against the Chinese in the media, of course of time, in books, novels, TV, movies, films. The Chinese must go. But it's always been a systematic racism of America. The Japanese internment, 120,000 Japanese were interned for 4 years because they were the enemy against America. Many were loyal. The 442nd Infantry Regiment was the classic heroism of the Nikkei community. But for the indigenous natives, the Indians, massacres, reservations, the Africans, slavery, and lynchings, 4,000 plus lynchings over the course of time in America, 4,000. Hispanics, discrimination, and deportations. In spite of this, I still perceive America is our promised land, where we can endure for our hopes, our dreams for the loved ones. It is our utopia, our paradise, our heaven, our opportunities, our freedoms, our diversity. For me, my American dream was an outward pursuit of education, the house, the family, the career. and my wealth. But my life was still a puzzle. And a turning point for me was on January 30th, 2003, when a dear friend of mine in the bungalow took a gun and killed himself. And that was a paradigm shift for me to look inwardly to pursue from our forefathers in America and in China, my roots. And of course, the past 18 years, meeting the crew chief at a China Clipper, going back to my village in 2007 as a homecoming, as a fallen leaf from Gold Mountain to America, to the Let Die Law, the castles in the sky. The second family reunion, the memories of the steel box of my father during World War II. Qingming, May 8, 2009, at the Hill of the Flying Swan, paying respect to 3 sojourners on the tombs of the Hill of the Flying Swan. My great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, buried up there at the Hill of the Flying Swan. And then May 10th, 2019, 150 years later, at Pomerania Point, Utah, I represented my great-great-grandfather, Vincent Chen, on May 10th, 2019, for the Army of Canton. So what we have here is a long legacy in America, started with my forefathers, the sons of Dragon Hill Village, with their bittersweet lives of treks, traces, and tears to the promised land of Gold Mountain. And we hear your hopes, our hearts sing your dreams. Me, the 6th generation, the civil engineer. My son, 7th generation, the filmmaker. We are here in America, Gold Mountain, to continue our American dream with pride, faith, and truth, with our identity, with our destiny, with our journey, our American dream, the Zhang Clan Odyssey on Gold Mountain.
Thank you very much, Raymond. That was very stirring, and what a rich history your family has in this country and the great contributions they've made. We know that you'll have much more insights for us when we get to the question and answer portion of our program. Next up, we have a very special guest, one of our next panelists. It happens to be Dr. Pei-Te Lien, political science professor at UC Santa Barbara. Now, she was born and raised in Taiwan and planned to become, of all things, a journalist. But fortunately for all of us, she decided to earn her PhD in political science. She's highly regarded by her academic peers, who elected her vice president of the Western Political Science Association and co-chair of the 2022 annual meeting of the American Political Science Association. So let's hear now from Professor Lien.
Yes, let's see. I can share. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be invited to this exciting forum. And actually, I'm so honored to follow Raymond because I'm the 1st generation. I have no roots in the United States before me, so I'm really envious of somebody who has such a long history. I'm the child of Chinese refugees to Taiwan. Therefore, I have been when I grown up, I never get to know my grandparents. Not today. I never met them. I do not know their name. I don't know their history because that was political taboo for a long, long while for me to know. However, here I am in the United States, starting my 1st generation. However, it is important to know that my American journey actually started in Taiwan, and I watched the US popular TV shows and genre movies and all those things when I grew up, other than studying, of course, right? And my America was white, and only white people were good, in those popular movies and TV shows, sitcoms, and all those. But I didn't know that, right? Because I did not know the concept of race. And I did not know the differences and the histories between Blacks and Americans, American Indians, Mexicans, and other Latino Americans. and they were usually characterized, cast as bad people, and they deserve mistreatment. That was the biases, right, in the American popular media, I would say still today. However, I did not know, right? I was just being, you can say, I was being indoctrinated, right? Before I even arrived in the United States about this racial concept and racial hierarchies, okay? Which is, of course, very, very contradictory to this ideas of everybody's born equal. Okay, so I have no concept of who are Asians, right? Because I was growing up in a very homogeneous society, right? We do not talking about racial and ethnic terms. I'm sharing this because I know many of you are immigrants. And so I actually, took many years for me to actually learn about this concept, and it's a personal journey, okay? But certainly today I'm also teaching in many occasions about this. And then when I applied for graduate schools, from Taiwan to the United States, I did not know which box to check when I was faced with things of white, blacks, and whatever, right? Because I have no racial concept. And so I end up checking the other, okay? And it really took me a few years before I realized I'm actually Asian. Okay, so basically racial and ethnic identity was not a natural thing, right? In most of the teaching, in most of society, certainly not in Taiwan, not in the 60s and 70s or even 80s, okay? Not in the US either, okay? Until there was a civil rights movement, until there was ethnic studies movement actually at the beginning with 1968 and in San Francisco State actually, right? And so today, that's not taking these things for granted. And I want to actually talk about also my first stop. So, I was admitted to Ann Arbor, Michigan, right, University of Michigan. And I did not realize that I was only 40 miles away from where Vincent Chen, Chen Guoren, was beaten to death and murdered in 1982, right? I did not know of that tragedy. Therefore, I certainly did not participate in the protests and demonstrations that organized by something called the Justice for Vincent, that movement that took place in Detroit, right, and elsewhere actually in the nation that began in 1983 because of the injustice, the life sentencing actually faced by the killers, Vincent Chen's killers, okay? And I guess the reason that I was not involved, of course, is probably because I have no identity with the fellow Asian American, let alone fellow Chinese American, right? I was an international student when I entered, and of course then become full-time housewife. So there's something about that lack of information, but certainly also it was in that time, a lack of awareness actually of the need for ethnic studies and lack of identity. And so when I published my first book from my dissertation in 1997, it was actually about political participation of Asian Americans in Southern California. And I just checked in preparation for this forum. It did not mention Vincent Chen. Okay, and what is Vincent Chen? So just in case you need a reminder, okay, this picture is actually not in Detroit, but actually in Los Angeles. Okay, it shows, right, people who are, rallies, right, protesting the need for justice for Vincent Chen, right? And it was happening during the economic downturn, right? During the layoff of auto workers and anti-Asian racism. And also he was mistaken as a Japanese, right? Even though he's an adoptee from China. And then that causes a tragic death, okay? But then it was not just about his death. It's actually is the life sentence, the unfairness, right, of his death, right, an inability for an Asian American to receive justice. That is why it galvanized people like Helen Zia and others who formed the American Citizens for Justice, that organization, and then rally not only Asian American, but also Black Americans, white Americans, Latino American, basically a multiracial movement and national movement to try to petition for justice for Vincent Chen, okay? And then after the case was tried as a federal civil rights case, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, actually it was not able to actually convict convicted killers, but only to have it thrown out on appeal because of some mishandling of the information. And then retrial was actually ordered, and it was moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, because the need for relocation, but it resulted actually in acquittal for Chen's killer. So basically, the Chen's killer did not spend a single day in jail. Okay, so you can say justice was not served, right, through this movement. Now, why are we talking about it? Why does it matter? Okay, because I know several things here, right? It highlighted the vulnerabilities of the model minority to anti-Asian violence. The Asian Americans' feeling of defensiveness in the US legal political system. And it provided also a blueprint of action, of political action for a minority group. This is one of the first time actually in our Asian American history, actually, we were able to form a national multiracial coalition when state and local justice had not been served or has been miscarried. Right. It was also the first federal civil rights case, hate crime case for Asian Americans. Right. It changed the manslaughter sentencing in Michigan. And victims' family actually, not after that, I get to deliver a victims' impact statement to the judge. So some of the sort of legal reform there. Okay, and so in my second book, the making of Asian Americans through political participation, right? I was able to include the Chen case in my description of the evolution of the Asian American political community. And I described the Chen case as a turning point of the Asian American movement, right, which started in 1968 from a phase of protest. And this time is talking about from protest to politics. To talking about not only to engage the elected officials and then to become candidates and elected officials of our own, because then I realized just being a grassroots movement is not enough. Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about the Asian American as a term. But Asian American is not just a race, it's actually also a pan-ethnicity, a pan-ethnic identity, okay? And it was born out of a movement, the Asian American movement. Okay, so do not take it for granted, right? Asian is not actually a natural term attached to us. It was created, okay? In the US, race is not about biology, but about power. Okay, probably many people already sense that, right? Racial labels are basically imposed upon us, probably upon people who do not think they relate to each other. Right, but because of for Asian American, because of this pan-ethnic identity, this concept of pan-ethnicity, therefore we were able to band together. Okay, and so for the ideas of pan-ethnicity for Asian American, right? It is a collection of people of different ethnicities, of Asian ethnicities. It is also a phenomenon out of the process of racialization being made into a race called Asian. All right, and it also is an outcome of political construction of a pan-Asian identity and community building and coalition. Basically, is a product of a political coalition building across Asian ethnic group and oftentimes also involve other racial groups. Okay, and so I did talk about that it began in 1968. It was on a UC Berkeley campus. So it's a California story, but it's more than California. Okay, and so it was through an organization called Asian American Political Alliance, a student organization. And they basically were frustrated and wanting to express their anxiety and their desire for empowerment and for liberation, just like African American in the Black liberation movement. And so these mostly Japanese, but also Chinese and a few Filipino American and some Korean as well. These students there, college students, actually, they started the movement, the Asian American movement. Okay, and then after the initial phase of the movement, which began in 1968, toward at the end of, that was the heat actually of the Vietnam War, right? In 1975, it was the end of the Vietnam War. So this is Asian American movement is also very much about an anti-war movement, right? People actually enraged by seeing Asian Vietnamese, meaning they got killed on the TV screen, right? And they see people look like them, just being murdered by the U.S. military. And so that was part of the impetus of the Asian American movement. Okay, and I also want to talk about several factors that actually help maintain and actually recreate that movement or even strengthen the movement. Okay, and such as this, racial lumping by society and the governmental policies and practices that put us together, like it or not. Okay, and then anti-Asian violence or bigotry in the media, in the society, in politics. Okay, but also inter-ethnic marriages, right, between the Asian ethnic groups, right, marriages there also create some bonding, okay, as one community. And then membership in Pan-Asian organizations on and off campus, as well as in cultural organizations, in church-based organizations, such as in this organization, certainly it also creates opportunities for people to bond together as one pan-ethnic identity. Okay, last but not least, participation in pan-ethnic political organizing and coalition building across nativity. That means whether you're born in the United States or not, right? Ethnicity, race, class, gender, okay, otherwise known as AAM, okay? And these are events, you know, I can say Vincent Chen, right? Justice Vincent Chen, the Wen-Ho Lee, right? And even Japanese American redress movement. And of course, also the Stop AAPI Hate right now. These are all part of that Asian American movement. And I only have one more slide here. Because this is May, we're celebrating the heritage of Asian American and Pacific Islanders. I want to remind everybody, we have a heritage of pursuing justice. We have a history there, okay? And very recently, our Congress was able to pass the Senator Hirono and the Representative Grace Mann. They proposed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, okay, May 18, which is the birthday of Vincent Chen. Right, the Congress passed that to stem the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes by expediting process of reporting and prosecuting the crimes. It passed the Senate with nearly unanimous vote by one, except one, okay, Republican vote, and it passed the House with 364 to 662 vote. Again, all the nays are Republicans. So this is a rare achievement in a time of deep the political polarization. Okay, and so we thought this is a cause for celebration. However, the bill was actually opposed by more than 100 Asian American groups and LGBTQ communities. Okay, and so they argue that a progressive coalition advocated, these people, right, they are progressive coalition, they advocate for a shift from putting resources in enforcement to community-based solutions for a more just society. Right, they are issues of structural inequality, you know, a number of things, you know, that later on we can talk about. But basically, I just want to bring out these. Okay, so do we have a problem of unity? Right, I would think that you need electoral politics, right, such as, you know, Congress, people, representative of Asian American descent, they're doing. I would say just one type of politics, even though they seem to be very prominent. I would say grassroots activism matters. Such an organization that you have here matters, okay? Our movement, the Asian American movement, is an ongoing collective effort for justice, okay? Also, we continue to search for the best way to achieve. We continue to need to be, actually, and we cannot and are not satisfied. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lien. You know, we're running a few minutes behind schedule, but we're learning so much today. And I think this is all very stimulating for all of us. But we will have plenty of time for questions in the coming minutes. Last but certainly not least is our fourth panelist, Catherine Chen. Now, she was born and raised in the Bay Area, and she also went to Stanford. And I'm told, and you won't see it on her on this bullet point presentation, that she is quite an athlete. She's an accomplished synchronized swimmer. Now, professionally, she has focused on combating sex and labor trafficking, both globally and in the US. And she lived in Indonesia for a number of years as part of that work. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much, David. You have just achieved my nightmare, which is talking about synchronized swimming in the middle of a panel, but I'm just kidding. You know, it's such an honor to be here with you, with Judge Nunley, with the panelists that are here. And I really want to thank the leadership of BRI and APAPA for pulling this civic forum together. It's a unique opportunity to really think about our heritage and our future and our direction. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about my own professional background, except to say that as the Chief Executive Officer at Polaris, we're a national anti-trafficking organization. We work to end labor trafficking and sex trafficking and restore freedom to survivors of trafficking. And we do that work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because we operate the US National Human Trafficking Hotline. And over the last 14 years, we've assisted nearly 30,000 victims and survivors to get out, to get help, to get on their road to recovery. And the reason why I want to talk about that today is because human trafficking is one of the fastest growing crimes in the world. It affects nearly 25 million people around the world, and the UN estimates that it earns traffickers about $150 billion a year. It also is a deeply impactful issue in the Asian American community, because Asian Americans are very frequently trafficked for prostitution, as well as for exploitative labor in restaurants, in domestic work, in construction, and other areas. But ultimately, human trafficking is the result of broken systems. And that's really what I wanted to spend today, the rest of today, talking about. So much of what Judge Nunley's talked about, what Ray laid out, what Professor Lien talked about, was the systems over the years that have disadvantaged Asian Americans, that have allowed for race to become equivalent to power, as Professor Lien was just saying. And for me, I ended up working in a career of more than 20 years working on human trafficking, because I saw firsthand the ways in which our economic systems and our laws and our policies were allowing some people to exploit other people for the purposes of their own profit. So let me back up for a minute and just talk a little bit about how I ended up where I am. As David mentioned, I was born and raised in the Bay Area, in Walnut Creek and in Alamo. And growing up, I think I had an experience that was probably very similar to most of your children's experiences. Or if there are any young people listening in on this webinar, some of your experiences. I grew up going to Chinese school on Saturday mornings and hated it. And honestly, my parents know this, didn't really retain very much Chinese, unfortunately. And then I grew up going to churches on Sunday mornings that were Chinese churches. And so my weekends were very, very, Chinese. But Monday through Friday, I was going to public school in Northern California at a time when California was still, was not yet majority minority. And my experience was pretty white. And so my day-to-day experiences of being both in school and also on a swim team that was largely white meant that I really had to navigate as a kid what it meant to be Asian versus what it meant to be American, right? When was it enough to be a little bit different? When was it not okay? When was it too different to be acceptable? What was I gonna do when a kid came up to me and told me to go back to a country I had never been to? What was I gonna do when a kid came up to me and pulled up the corner of his eyes and made all sorts of weird noises at me? And how was I going to internalize that over time and learn to sort of shrink back, right? That's really what the experience, I think, for second generation kids who are predominantly American, who happen to have Asian ethnicity, Asian background, some exposure to Asian culture, but we live with the guarantees of the Constitution sort of the same way that Judge Nunley talked about. We sort of take for granted that the Constitution speaks to us and that the rights that are enshrined in it belong to us as well. And so I think for me, that was a real challenge. In high school, California introduced a very controversial proposition, Proposition 187, which was the Save Our State initiative. And it was a very cynical law that was designed to legitimize racial profiling and to prevent anyone who was suspected of being undocumented from not being allowed to go to get medical care and not be allowed to get education. And for me, I grew up with my grandparents within like 5 minutes of me. Both sets of grandparents were actually within like 45 minutes of me growing up. And the immediate thing that I recognized with Prop 187 was that I had experienced these sort of individual cases of racism as a kid, bullying and othering and insults. But Prop 187 was the first time in my young life that I saw that America sometimes allowed laws and policies to be introduced and even passed that systematically disadvantaged certain groups and advantaged others. And for me, that was a political awakening. That was the moment in time where I recognized that racism was a system, racism was structure. It wasn't just an individual insult or offense to me. A couple of years later, I had gone on to do the sort of model minority thing. I'd gone to Stanford, I became a management consultant. I was trying to make money and get on the path toward, you know, respectability. And I realized that I really did not want to be a management consultant. So I went to, I took a couple of weeks off. I went with a group of friends from church to Saipan Island. The idea at the time was that I was going to go teach English for a couple of weeks and, you know, figure out my life. And when I got to Saipan Island, which is one of the islands in the Northern Marianas, right next to Guam, what I discovered, this was in 2000, was 7,000 Chinese garment factory workers who had been trafficked into the middle of an island in the Pacific Ocean. These were Chinese garment factory workers who labored enormously long hours, making t-shirts and other things for Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger. And they had been brought to Saipan by unscrupulous recruiters who had promised them that they were going to America and were going to be able to work their way to riches. And when I met them, essentially the rule was that you were working off the debt that you had paid to a recruiter. And so you had to work as many hours as you possibly could in order to work off that debt. And the only way off the island that was 2 miles wide by 7 miles long in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, was to buy your own ticket off of the island. So for me, the experience of interacting with these garment factory workers was life-changing, because I suddenly realized that, number one, I had a little bit of Chinese language enough to be able to relate to them. I looked like them, and I had all the rights that were enshrined to me because of the US Constitution, but the Northern Mariana Islands were not protected by the labor law, by the US labor law at the time, even though it was a US territory. I came home from that experience completely changed. I knew that this was the thing that I wanted to do with my life. I went back to graduate school, and at the time, the US had just passed a law on human trafficking. And I did a self-study. I got a master's in public health, but I focused on trafficking. And that's what I ended up doing for more than 20 years of my life. And the reason why I wanted to share that story is because I think it's really easy to look at my background and say, model minority, right? There's a Stanford degree in there, and there's an Ivy League degree in there, and there's a CEO title behind my name. But what I'm hopeful for this next generation, and in particular, because of the moment that we're in with all of the hate incidents that are going on, is that the next generation, maybe that's your kids, or that's your grandkids, or that's you, that you're going to find your Prop 187 and you're going to find your Saipan. That the reason why Asian Americans matter is because we can weave together the richness of our history, thinking about everything that Ray just shared, some of the privilege and advantage that we do have because we are largely an educated group that is sitting in this room, certainly, that we are ascending into positions of power. And for the first time, at least in my life, there are Asian Americans in every sector. Right? You can look at Jeremy Lin, and you can look at Aquafina, and you can look at all of the engineers and scientists and cabinet members and everyone, and the vice president. And we are in a moment where political representation is a powerful opportunity for us. But in order for us to really take advantage of that, we have to contend with what it means to both be Asian and American. And that is not an easy identity. That's not an easy thing to solve, but I'm hopeful that this conversations like this, are the foundation by which we figure out what it means, especially for those of us who are born in America and have had to navigate that our whole lives. What does it actually mean to both be Asian and American? And who do we need to be in solidarity with as we build this political movement that Professor Lien was talking about? So really looking forward to many, many more conversations. And I want to thank the organizers again.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. We appreciate hearing all about you, all that you've been working on these past few years. Now, let's bring up all of our panelists as we begin a far-reaching discussion focusing on issues that we're all concerned about. Now, together, we might find some solutions. Now, this is a conversation, so I urge Judge Nunley, Raymond Chong, Professor Lien, and Catherine Chen to please jump in and make this as interactive as possible. And thanks to our audience, we have received many good questions submitted by you. So we've added a couple of questions via chat during the past hour. Now, our first question deals with major problems. Many fellow Americans worry about gun violence, homelessness, and poor public education. Many believe that the root causes of these problems are racism, lack of mental health resources, and the huge wealth gap in our country. So panelists, please address one of these main problems and please offer your solution.
Well,
I'll go first, and I'll tell you something that I'm starting to see, and it's really troubling within the criminal justice system. Of course, we deal with gun violence quite a bit, and I've been on different sides of it. I grew up in a neighborhood where gun violence was prevalent in my community, and then just kind of getting becoming a prosecutor and seeing at the state level, the federal level, the local level. One of the disturbing things that I'm starting to see, and we have to come up with a solution for it, and I really don't have any answers. We are starting to see the mental health. There's a mental health issue. You see very many times when people who are suffering from mental health issues and mental health diseases, they take up weapons, and particularly gun is particularly related to gun violence. I don't know. I think that education is a way to go about it, but I also think that there's some problems with that, because we have laws on the books. We have HIPAA laws. We have certain laws which preclude us from learning about someone's medical history, which dovetails into their mental health history, and that's a problem. When someone doesn't have to disclose their mental health history, especially when that mental health history makes them more prone towards violence. So I'm presenting a problem to you, but I don't know what the solution is right now, because it's a very recent problem. When I say recent, I say probably in the last 20 years. That's recent, and we're starting to see more and more of that. We're incarcerating more people because they commit crimes, because they have mental health issues. And we just simply put, we're not dealing with it. One of the most ineffective ways to treat someone with a mental health issue is to put them in jail and incarcerate them, because what do they do in jail? They decompose rapidly. They just go downhill. So it is a problem, and I'm seeing it, and I'm speaking to that problem right now. But I wish we had some type of solution. But we're starting to see more and more of it. So,
please, anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, this is Ray. Yeah, my thought is it's a matter of government, whether it's at City Hall, the County Hall, State Capitol, prioritizing the resources, or to invest the money, put the staffing, the programs in place. But it's up to the legislatures to set the direction, set the tone, and implement programs to help the homeless, the mentally disturbed, and so forth. The government has a role, a big role.
What about the issue of public education? We see a lot of funding being cut back. We see a lot of young children who are not getting fundamentals. Are we going to have a generation that's going to be disadvantaged in the workplace when they eventually get into the workplace?
I guess I cannot reply as an educator. Certainly, I'm very much concerned about it, right? Even though I teach at college, but actually, whenever we talk about racial inequality, what's the solution? What's the root cause? We have to talk about K-12 education and talking about in public education, talking about resource issues there. However, I can comment on those points a little bit later on, but I like to focusing on this idea of racism, because even though in my talk, I talk about racism, but as an immigrant of color, actually, whenever we talk about racism, it actually intersects also with sexism, also with nativism, right? Just from the perspective of an Asian immigrant woman myself, and talking about we across all the different class spectrums. Some are working class, some are indeed, like Catherine talking about, and undocumented. They're enslaved. Basically, but some are also extremely CEO as well. So we, regardless of class background, we do share some common identity in the system that was structurally and being treated unequal because we are not white males. And so this structural issues, the inequality issues that related therefore to others were the problems, certainly is something that I guess we will need to spend more time to discuss possible solutions.
David, you mentioned, I think focusing on public education is important, and we are worried about poor public education. The one thing that I see when I go to, and I usually, because of my background, I always go to the worst public schools to speak to them. I mentor some of the kids who are involved with a lot of issues in the community. But the one thing that I do see is I guess I don't see it as much as a wealth issue. And I know that's there. I'm not going to discount that and say it's not there. There is an issue of wealth correlating to poor public education. But one of the things that I do see is I think we have a manpower issue as well. If, for example, you have Judge Nunley and, some other prominent leader of the community going into a public school to talk to these kids, to try to give them a blueprint for success and try to teach them about how you go about systematically accomplishing your goals and how they go about doing that, then that's something that's fixable, because we need to take it upon ourselves. If we all take it upon ourselves to do what we can to educate, take on mentorships and be there. A lot of these kids I see in the public school system, they don't learn basic things. They don't know how to love. They don't know how to hug. They don't know what a functioning family member, a functioning family unit does, because they used to dysfunction, and that becomes the new normal for them. That's their norm. That's a manpower issue. We can teach those type of things. If we have a concerted effort to teach those type of things, then it can work. Now, I want to go back to what I said originally, that I definitely don't discount how, resources play a part in this. We do need more resources, but, to the extent we're dealing with a very devastating pandemic right now, and our resources tend to be focused on that, and then we focus on something else. I think that what we need to get back to is just good old fashioned taking care of each other and looking out for each other, and setting up mentorships, just going into the schools and I'll tell you, it's effective. I've done it, and I do it. I used to go in the juvenile hall and talk to kids in juvenile hall, and they really want guidance. They want guidance. And so I think that's important in my estimation.
Let's switch topics here and talk a little bit about something that's really top of mind for all of us right now, and that's hate crimes. The term China virus definitely spurred an increase in crimes against Asian Americans in the past year. Now, Asians have been fighting the myth of the model minority, the perpetual foreigners, but now we see all this hate, and it's lashing out at and even our elders, but even others who are younger as well. How do we stop Asian hate? Let's start with you, Raymond.
I can say, David, and you and our family go a long time back to Hoi Ping, but it's always been endemic, the anti-Asian hate, in particular the early days, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Filipino, Koreans. It's always been a systematic path of hatred, whether it's violence, whether it's lynching. It's always been endemic. It's just been raised to a higher level of awareness, of sensitivity. And we got to have a concerted effort, cut together all colors of race, even the whites. We need to work together to have a common solution, a common path beyond hatred. Believe in love. That is the key, love and peace.
I could just add to that. I think that there's also a unique moment for us right now, right? To really make sure that the plurality of voices is out there around Asian Americans, like the perspectives, the different opinions, the different generations, the different ways in which Asian Americans are in America, I think is a really key thing. And I think to Raymond's point too, there's a a history and a context that already exists in America, right? We are not the first group of people to experience hate crimes. And we have a lot of work to do to build trust between coalitions, between African Americans and Asians, between Latinos and Asians, between ourselves and even within ourselves, between East Asians and South Asians, right? And so it's not to say that we're to blame for any of it, certainly not, but I think that there is a level of work we can start with, like immediately, even within our own families, right? Which is, how are we figuring out who we're going to be allied with, and how do we understand and learn from the context of how hate has, or our racism has existed in this country for centuries, and frankly from its founding.
Judge Nunley, do you think the bar is very high for prosecuting hate crimes? Does that need to be examined?
Unfortunately, I don't make the laws. I just interpret them. But I will say this: we see a fair amount of hate crimes here in the Eastern District, and I think what we're going to start to see is we're going to start seeing more hate crimes involving Asian Americans, at least given what's been happening right now in society. So we do see a fairly good amount. And you're right, the bar is pretty high. There's certain elements that prosecutors are required to prove. The hardest thing to prove, and this is just from the trials that I participate in, the hardest issue to prove is intent. Because when you prove intent, you have to prove what's in someone's mind. So if a person, for example, is not displaying some hate sign, if they're not saying those operative words that we all know are hateful, if they're not doing those type of things to show what their actual intent is, then prosecutors forego charging those hate crime enhancements in certain situations. So it is a high bar, and it really is a high bar, but intent is one of the most difficult elements to prove of any crime. If you take a murder crime, for example, unless you see someone with a smoking gun, otherwise you have to get into their minds and show why are they doing what they're doing. Sometimes it's not so obvious. Let's say, for example, I saw the other day on the news, I saw an Asian woman being beaten. Okay. At first blush, when we look at it, we think that's a hate crime right there because they're beating her because she's Asian. But unless you have all the attendant facts that show what the person's intent is, it may be hard to prove that, as opposed to trying to prove it's an assault or assault with intent to commit murder or an attempted murder. So that's why the bar is very high for those crimes. That is true. But it's true for most crimes, especially when you have a crime where you have to show what someone's intent is.
Catherine sort of touched on the subject of allyship. We all need allies. We're looking for allies in other segments of our population to address all these issues. To what degree does the Asian American community need to reach out to the Black Lives Matter movement and join their call for the abolition and defunding of police?
I think I can answer that. Well, personally, we need to be reminded, like, what is the reason to even motivate the formation of the Black Lives Matter? It was actually similar reaction to when Vincent Chen was killed and then he did not receive justice. It was through the sense of injustice for Trayvon Martin, right, the killer of Black youth. There was that. And then, so when we talk about the Black Lives Matter, we need to understand what's coming from. And then when you have a series of Black men and women that were brutally killed and senselessly, oftentimes by police through their training and whatever protocols they thought they were following, and that it was just extremely troubling to any American. And so here we're talking about Asian American, and how do we respond to that? We need to know that injustice doesn't only happen to Blacks, it happened also to Asian, even including the victims of police brutality, right? Christian Hall, right? He was adoptee to the Black parents and Filipino mother. And then we also have the Filipino American and Navy person, I think it's Angela Quinto, right? They are fellow Asian Americans as well, but they were mentally, ill. And so, you have intersections of race and mental health issues there, in addition to poor police training, if training is the issue. But so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, one of the appeal is actually about the defunding the police, about trying to have a fundamental, some talk about the issue of abolition. That means completely remove the institution. Okay, and I know there are many disagreements there, such as I just mentioned something about Congress, right? Our own Congresswoman, they are passing, leading the effort to pass the Hate Crimes Act, talking about reforming the law enforcement system, like better collecting, better data identification, and hopefully that actually leading to the more effective prosecution of hate crimes. Okay, and however, there are disagreement within our own community in terms of we need police, right? Political immigrant Americans, such where places where I came from, we actually think police are our protectors, right? When bad people comes, the robbers, coming to our home invasion, where do you call for first, right? You call for police. So I think this immigrant community actually has quite a, we have mixed reactions actually to the kind of reform we can need. I also believe police reform is actually a localized issue that are very much different from one place to the other in terms of finding the better ways to improve the system. But I think I've talked too long.
Raymond, do you think that there's a difference among generations, how receptive they are to forging relationships with other groups of people of color?
My sense is you got to be recognized. Us Asians are just as biased as the Africans, the Anglos. So there's the generational shift. My parents may have been racist themselves, in particular African Hispanics. It's a matter of building that trust, that communication, and it's going to take time. And a new generation, as they embrace other peoples of all colors, we need to be in harmony and together. It's going to take time. And knowing the new immigrants, they all have their own perception of biases, preconceived. My parents came from Hoi Ping, and I live in the barrio, East Los Angeles. All my friends were Hispanic. My best friend was Gilbert Molina. And growing up, I did not care he was brown, yellow, or white. He was my best friend. So I go beyond color when I was growing up. That was my perception, my paradigm at that time.
David, can I just add to that too? I mean, I think it's really important for us to think about how we learn from the Black community. I think that I get that this is sort of second generation uniquely that is speaking here, but our original sin as a country was slavery, right? We have so much to learn about the economic structures, the racial structures, the political structures that have been created in America that we all live within, that we are all responding to because of the original way that America was established. And I think the other piece of this is really, we're so often beholden to the media portrayal of each other, right? It's not that we have a lot of work to do in terms of racism within our own communities. But I was reading a report this week in preparation for this conversation, and I was hoping I could just share one stat with everyone, which is the University of Michigan did a study looking at more than 4,300 media reports of anti-Asian hate over the course of the last year. They identified 1,023 distinct incidents. Out of those incidents, 184 cases had the race of the perpetrator reported. 89.6% of the perpetrators were white men. 5.43% of the perpetrators were Black. And when we think about what is on our social media, what is being shared around our WeChat channels, what is being shared within our communities, is that we have a really, really disproportionate sense of who's doing the attacking. And I think those are the things that we as a community have to figure out how to have those conversations, how to gain access to that data, and how to contend with what Raymond's talking about within our own communities, because I don't think we have the full picture. And I think that we're making choices and making assumptions and making allies and allegiances in directions that are often misunderstood and misinformed.
Any final thoughts, Judge Nunley?
You know, you saw me nodding my head. I can't say it any better. I think I think that you know, Catherine is absolutely right, and I do think that historically, when we look at where our groups come from and where we're going, some of the old hatreds and perceptions that we have, because some of this is based upon perception, and Catherine just hit the nail on the head there. And we have to sort of put that aside. When you come to the table, you have to put that aside, because if your goal is to move society forward and to move us forward, you can't get bogged down with the past, because this is just too important. We keep coming back to this same point historically here in this country in one shape, form, or fashion. We keep coming back to it. And I think why? Because sometimes we just can't let go of the past and move forward. And that's especially true when it comes to groups getting together, like the Asian community getting together with the Black community to address some of these issues, with the Hispanic community, with the white, with any community coming together to resolve these issues. Sometimes it gets bogged down. And I'll tell you, I had an experience like that. Years ago, I used to serve with, our U.S. Marshal here was Jerry Inamoto and Dorothy Inamoto. Some of you may know Jerry and Dorothy. And Jerry was the head of our racial profiling group we had here in Sacramento. And we were also looking at hate crimes. It was a hate crimes task force. And I'll tell you, that was the one thing that sort of kept popping up. People who would sort of, you know, kind of have this notion that, first of all, this didn't exist. And if it did, it exists because of this that happened in the past. And I think when we come together to resolve these issues, we really need to put those aside and recognize first that there is an issue and we need to move forward. We can't keep going backwards. We can't keep going backwards. We got to move forward.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to a little lighter question, but it has to do with careers. And this one probably, we'll start with Catherine on this one. Our youth group had this question about what advice do you have when someone is trying to ascend the path towards senior leadership in a company? If they're aiming for the C-suite, or they really want to be a corporate leader, what do they need to be thinking about now as young people, students who are still developing their career path?
Thanks, David. This might seem like a kind of a funny answer, but for me, you know, the main thing that I would say is authenticity is the thing that you actually need to be thinking about now. You know, it used to be the case that, like, if you had the right degree and you went to the right schools and you had the right technical experiences, you were going to just naturally ascend until the point at which you, like, ran a technical team, and then maybe someone would see you and then pluck you up out of that middle management level and bring you into the elusive, you know, senior leadership levels. Now, I think it's very different in organizations and in corporate culture, right? Now it's very much about, do you have what it takes for people to want to follow you? And by the time you're a senior manager or a director of a unit at somewhere in a company, the chances are your technical skills are already validated. And what comes next is really about how you talk about yourself, how you let people in, how you relate to people, whether or not you demonstrate empathy and understanding of who they are and what they're going through, and whether or not you're really creating culture around you that people want to trust and follow. And so the number one thing I'd say, and it actually goes all the way back to what I was saying in my opener, is really understanding what it means to be Asian and American is not just about political activism. It's also about your own success in society, right? It's about how easily you can braid together what you care about and who you are so that other people want to follow you. The one other practical thing I'd say is build networks. You know, make sure that you are getting to know people who are in all walks of life and doing all sorts of things and in all generations. Chang Liao may not enjoy this story, but I got to know him because his wife let me intern with her for a summer when I was in high school. So this is a very, very long time ago, right? But this community matters. And for those of you who are, young people who are listening in, like you've got 109 other people on this panel who are probably willing to mentor you. So so get on that.
I'd like to segue to what Catherine said, is definitely mentorship is a key. Finding the right person to groom you to that path, to that point of success. And another one segue is networking is also crucial, whether it's at your level, peer level, or higher level, but also to be a good communicator. And the most important about communication is listening. Listening. You have to listen well, different opinions, different thoughts, different ideas, and at the same time, digest it and articulate it well. Those are things: mentorship, networking, communication.
And I'll caution you in seeking mentorships. The one thing you have to be mindful of, it's important to make sure that your mentors are not just people who look like you. Okay, and I say that because I've had mentors who obviously looked like me and came from my same background, but I've also had many more mentors who didn't look like me and who didn't come from my background. And they saw something in me and they trusted me, and in turn, I trusted them. I have a number of law school students, high school students, you name it. I get calls from people always wanting me to mentor them in something, and I have it's like the United Nations. It's not just people who look like me. It's different people, and I think that's very, very important. In addition to all the other things the panel has said, I think it's very important to realize that. Open yourself up to being mentored by someone, and take yourself out of your comfort zone. It's important to do that because you just never really know what that person could provide and what value they can provide to you and your career and where you want to go.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to a different kind of topic here, which is also very sensitive, and that has to do with this recent trend of people saying, "Go back to China." It's very hateful. It's meant to inflict a hurt. Raymond, as a sixth-generation American, you can't even avoid it, because of the way we look. Yes. How do you think we as a nation can get past being judged as being not American simply because of our race, ethnicity, or even our name? Should we start doing more English-speaking joint conferences, inviting Blacks and whites and other people of different colors to begin dialogues and promote mutual understanding?
I like the path you're suggesting, David, because my friends are all the spectrum of colors: Hispanic, Africans, white. I'm colorblind in a way. I just look at the character of that person, not the instant reaction that he's Black, he's white, but the character of that person. I look beyond that, like Dr. Martin Luther King, like looking at the core of that individual, the plus, the optimism of that value of that person. I look beyond just color.
Anyone else? Okay, let's talk about affirmative action. Quite a number of recent Chinese immigrants who arrived in the US in 1990 or later opposed affirmative action and California's Prop 16 in 2000. While a great majority of Asian Americans in general, including our second and earlier generations, support affirmative action. Why this discrepancy?
I can tell you one reason. The new immigrants don't know their legacy, the history of America, the glass ceiling we face as Asians, where we have very rare opportunities to go up from management to executive. We don't have that right path, and that's, I can understand for the immigrants. They don't see that. They just see it in black and white. Believe in the balance of power and things are properly done in the democratic way. But the second generation, the third generation, they know better. They know the actual experience that we do need affirmative action.
Sorry, I have some technical problem, but I'm back. So actually, I'd like to follow up and say that we need education. Right, there's a lot of misconception of what affirmative action is about. That affirmative action is a whole lot of things. Right? It's a policy, it's a measure, it's a program, and so depending on what people were thinking, and people may have, we may talking across each other. And we also know that affirmative action is not just about race, right? It's also about gender. It's not about contemporary, it's about historical marginalization and discrimination. And then you have 3 areas, right? Education, but also employment and business contracting, right? So many years ago, in 1996, right, California had this Proposition 209. Basically, voters approved for California to actually ban affirmative action consideration, right, in public institutions, including University of California. So I know that when I look at our admission criteria, we are banned from looking at somebody's racial background. However, when we report how many students we have recruited this particular year or whatever, we actually label them by their race. So many people sort of had a misunderstanding as if we are talking about race and only race, when in fact, they are ways to achieve the affirmative action purposes, but without using the name. And so for UC in particular, we're talking about comprehensive admission criteria. So it will be about context, right? School context is important. Your marriage, relative marriage in a school, in a GPA is very important. But then we also look at your experiences, particularly your ability to overcome the disadvantages in your own growing up experiences, and the ability to actually explore, challenging yourself of the different groups, people other than you, talking about diversity in that way. So there are many ways to actually achieve a more inclusive, equitable, and equal society that we can achieve without necessarily have to go through that particular term called affirmative action. However, there had always gonna be a struggle here in terms of public perceptions, politicians, interest groups. So we actually, particularly as educators, I really want to talk about the need for education to particularly the kind of racial conscious representation and the kind of participation that we all have. So basically, I'm a strong advocate for ethnic studies education.
I like to segue to Pei-Te. My education, when I grew up, I was totally whitewashed. I watched Dragnet, Adam 12. I thought the police were ultimate saviors of the world. I thought John Wayne was God. So it's the perception I was living in Los Angeles in the barrio that shaped my early years.
Good point. Let's switch to immigration. President George Bush has a new book out called Portraits of America's Immigrants. And in that book, he says, immigration should be embraced, not feared. Now, some people would disagree with that. Some people would definitely agree with that. Where do you stand on that? How do we change perceptions about whether immigration is good, bad, or otherwise?
For myself, for my family, we think immigration is wonderful. We're all strangers from different shores. We bring the best to the world here, to America. It strengthens us. It makes us a better country. I support immigration in that vein to get the right minds. I mean, you're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, or bring the best immigrants to our world, to our family.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, for some reason, often have a little bit of a scarcity mindset in the United States, right? When we really shouldn't. We have this sort of sense that if we got here, you should just, like, somebody should shut the door behind us. And I think that that's part of the challenge. Like, America is what it is because immigration makes us great, makes us diverse, gives us the different perspectives and even down to the level of like different food, thinking about Raymond's family and what it has contributed, right? And so, I spent a long time working on international issues. And one of the things that always struck me was that I would work in other countries with expatriates from like Europe. We'd be working together in Asia somewhere. And it always struck me that what makes America unique is that Americans generally have the ability to work across cultures with almost anybody. It's very, very different than places that are homogenous. And I think we have an advantage for that reason. I think the other thing is that immigrants traditionally in America are used as a scapegoat, right? We're used as the excuse for why economic downturns are happening or why, political things are not happening. Because all the way back to many generations, but thinking about Prop 187, it was the same idea that like immigrants were somehow to blame for our problems. And I think that there's a real political resistance that we owe ourselves and our future generations to make sure that anytime anyone is suggesting that it's immigrants' fault generically, that something's happening, or the idea of building a wall or whatever else it is, that we actually fight back and we make sure that we are, that our voices are heard.
Yeah, as an immigrant myself, I definitely am supportive of immigration. Otherwise, I won't be here. However, I like to remind people that the definition of immigration is not just for legal immigrants. I don't know what George Bush was talking about, but at least on our campus, right, dreamers, as well as the undocumented youth, they are our people too. They are taxpayers. They are our students. We have they have the equal need to be educated, and we have the equal responsibility to include them in our education. They are part of us. And so I hope people, when they talk about immigration issue, they can also be more, have compassion, that be able to include people who may be less advantaged than some of us, so that we can work together to make the USA a better nation.
Our next question, I think, is going to be one we can really get into here, because I think because it has to do with stereotypes. Now, there was a national survey, made a lot of news, from launch.org that said they surveyed adult Americans in all 50 states. Please name a prominent Asian American. And the top answer, if you can believe this, the top answer was, I don't know. And that came from 42%. Over 4 out of 10 people said they don't know a prominent Asian American. At number 2 was Jackie Chan, who is not even an American. And at number 3 was Bruce Lee, who has been gone for 48 years. So this really does underscore the fact that there are a lot of Asian Americans who have made valuable contributions in various fields, academic, arts, science, whatever, who just aren't recognized by the mainstream society. What does this say about our society? What do we do about changing this perception of the Asian American stereotype?
Well, David, they didn't mention you being the most recognized name across America yet. Sorry about that. No, but my sense is the media has been so dominant, whitewash. There's that stigma, the yellow pearl, that we're always a threat to the mainstream America. We have to raise our voices, be prominent, be forceful, be predominant. We have to have our seat in the table in Hollywood, in New York. Somehow, there are many people are doing that right now. They're doing their best, but the media has to change that perception of us Asians being always in the back room. We're always considered the second-class citizen in any circumstance. So we got to be at the same level in parity with everybody else.
Yeah, it's, I look at it, someone was saying earlier about, I think it was Ray who was saying about watching programs on television, and, you watch these programs, especially here, it was things that we took for granted as kids, and there were shows that I watched that were very disparaging even towards African Americans, and we watched them, we thought they were great shows. And it's the same thing. When we're talking about Chinese Americans and we talk about the Chinese, we used to see shows that we watch and they were just so absurdly racist, and we just kind of took it for granted. So in order to deal with the stereotypes, I think the only way you can deal with stereotypes is to really demonstrate to people how, for example, those stereotypes were just that. They were caricatures. They were stupid and they were dumb and they were based on nothing. And I think that's one way to deal with it. I think another way to deal with it is through education. For example, I was talking to, and this came up in the context of the conversation we're having now, and I always challenge my kids to be aware of social events, and they're very aware of social events. And so we were talking about, Bill Gates and computers, and I said to him, I said, well, do you know who probably holds more patents in computer technology than Bill Gates? And they said no. I said Anne Wang. They didn't even know who she was. And I know if you look at some of these people that we hold out to be sort of these figures, these great figures, we need to be educated. We need to educate our kids, and we need to let them know who these folks are, and people think about Wang Laboratories. I imagine people don't even know who Anne Wang is, and Wang Laboratories, but it's huge. She was in digital information technology. She's tremendous, so it's just education.
Professor Lien, do you think?
So important.
Catherine, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think because of the population that's listening to this webinar today, I mean, I think it's incredibly important to make sure that your kids find their voice, right? When I was growing up, and I think my parents are very different because they asked me to really figure out what I wanted to do in the world. But most of my peers, it's sort of like, put your head down, study really hard, excel, do not make any waves, do not get political, do not make your point of view known. And so we've all kind of grown up in this space of like intentional invisibility a little bit. And I think that there is a new opportunity in front of us right now, particularly because the hate crime situation makes it so that we have to be seen and known, right? And we have to fight back. And so there's a unique opportunity right now, I think, for those of you who are parents of teenagers or others to really be encouraging your children to find their political voice and to use it.
Professor Lien, let me ask you this question. There was a concept many years ago, educators, I know at Yale University and other universities, they were trying to promote media literacy, trying to get young people to be a lot more perceptive, a lot more critical of what images they see in media. Do you think that there needs to be a new movement to make young people more critical about the media they consume?
Thank you for raising this issue. Actually, I was going to comment on your previous observation from a recent study, right? Actually, when I was doing my dissertation, and Los Angeles Times did one of the very first Asian American survey on, actually it's Asian American in Southern California, but actually include more than Asian American. Yes, they asked a similar question in terms of who do you know about it? What do you know about Asian Americans? Who do you know? And believe it or not, yes, the majority answer is I don't know. However, the top of the list is indeed Jackie Chan. So that's a long-lasting image. But what does it mean in terms of over 25 years? What kind of change will be made? And therefore, there is definitely need to be a renewed movement, if not a new initiative, actually, to try to enhance media literacy in a multicultural way. Nowadays we talk about DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. That approach, right? Talking about indeed the need. I've been teaching Asian American politics for 25 some years, and this is to college seniors, right? Before they graduate from college, many people would tell me this is the first time, including Asian American of many backgrounds, of course, other than Asian American, they would say that, thank you, I never know that. And I used to teach in Utah, actually. And so therefore they would say, oh, my grandparents, I know that they work on the railroad, they talk about that, but they never talk about the Chinese rail workers, right? So it was that kind of awakening, almost like a sense of guilt. These kids, these young people that are learning for the first time about our own history. It's part of the Asian American and American history. And there is a lot of, it's more than just media literacy, but media stereotype did impact a lot of the people's perception, because Asian American, after all, is no more than 7% of the population, US population, even though it's about 16% in the California population. So it varies. People's ideas of where do you learn about Asian Americans mostly is not through personal interactions. Mostly it's actually through mediated information, such as popular media or social media. So therefore, it is extremely important actually that we pay attention to the need.
Thank you very much. On that note, I can't tell you how impressed I am by all of your thoughts during the past 2 hours. This has been a very fast-paced and very illuminating discussion on so many different subjects of importance for all of us. And so thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts. I believe that your insights have given us a lot to think about, especially about the role of citizens to be informed, to exercise the power of free speech, the power of voting, and the importance of civic engagement. Getting involved in discussing issues and solving problems is vital to a democracy. So thank you very much, Judge Nunley, to Raymond Chong, Professor Lien, and to Catherine Chen. And now we'll turn things back to Mike Liu.
Thank you so much, David. Well said. Thank you so much First of all, David, for your wonderful professional moderating, and my great appreciation as well to all the honorable guests, all the great questions, many of the questions asked and also being answered in a great way. So greatly appreciate. Let me pass that to Henry Lien. Mr. Henry Lien would conclude our forum. Henry, please.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, I am so shocked. I don't know about everyone else. I learned so much. My God, yeah, this is wonderful that I have not been able to enjoy for so long. And we want to give a special thanks to Judge Nunley and Mr. Chong, Professor Lien, and of course, Mrs. Chen. Of course, never forgot about our famous star, David Louie. Obviously, this is the right decision to have this kind of forum co-host together between APAPA and the Bridge Road Foundation. We certainly would like to continue this, and we will appreciate all the guest speakers, all the audience. Please let us know where we can possibly improve so we can continuously provide this educational program to our API fellow citizens. In fact, we already put in our drafting board that this kind of program may be put together by our youth. Those are younger than next generations. But anyway, we want to thank so much again for everyone, and certainly would like to continue this to make sure that we all can be treated equally and enjoy this beautiful country, the United States, where we all are citizens. Thank you again, and good night, everyone.